This particular video might be a little lengthy, maybe 30 45 minutes. I have a few on the channel that are that long. Hope everybody had a wonderful Thanksgiving if you and your family actually celebrate that. But in light of the historical things that I've studied, I've seen a lot of things from whites, blacks, other nationalities, and a lot of times people always want to know why are blacks whining all the time. And I'm not a big person on claiming victim status, so I want to let you know that off top. I'm not advocating for whining all the time, but I do believe things do need to be pointed out so that other people in society know this. And when we look at an issue like reparations, over the years there have been advocates on both sides of it. And myself, I've actually had mixed feelings about it. On one hand, I look at the fact that other groups of people and descendants have actually received compensation for the atrocities committed against them and their descendants. And on the other hand, I looked at it as at a position that says if I accept compensation for my ancestors' misery and pain, it almost makes feel it seems like I feel like it's okay, if that makes sense. And ironically, none of our pro-black organizations are talking about reparations. Our Congressional Black Caucus isn't talking about reparations. And right today, with the number of black politicians we have in office, none of them are talking about reparations. And the very few people that we hear talking about it, in theory, some of it sounds good, but they're advocating that they actually have access and control of the funds if they were ever administered. I don't know who put them in charge of that, but that's them. And so for the black politician, many of them have actually received payment already. And I'm not talking about monetary payment, but I'm talking about being able to join the good old boy system, which is called our government, and keep the rest of us black folk in check, to make our lives better, because they know what's better for us than we do. And our pro-black organizations are more concerned with their regular conferences than tending to issues that affect us as black people as a whole. And our black pastors never mention it because many of them are satisfied fleecing the flocks they tend to, and then turn around and play the fleece and exchange game with their buddy pastors on Sundays. The 3 o'clock and 3:30 services. The pastor and wife anniversary, the pastor and wife appreciation. Because those are two different events. Ursha annual day, choir annual day, youth annual day, mission Sunday, brotherhood Sunday. You get the idea. And each one of those events draw more resources out your pocket. So they don't care, even though historically they've actually been the mouthpiece for black Americans, or the Negro, because that's who we are. We're Negro, and I don't know what it's going to take to get in people's head that we're not African. We're Negroes. We're Hebrews. Negro and Hebrew is the same thing. It's just, everybody else knows our heritage but us. But that's not the talk for that. But slavery is a very sore issue to talk about because nobody is living today that lived during that period. As blacks, a lot of us feel old because our ancestors were treated unfairly. And whites that are living now don't feel like they owe anything because they personally never held any slaves. And it's like I saw something that said, I never owned any slaves, and the response to that was, yeah, but you didn't pick any cotton either. But slavery is a sore issue. And when we look at other groups of people who have received compensation for their mistreatment, all of them, with the exception of the Negro, have received some type of monetary compensation. But when it comes to us, the rallying cry is we should be happy because we were freed from the shackles of slavery. And that should be compensation enough for us. And I even saw where one guy said that the cost of the Civil War should be enough for us to be satisfied because a lot of money was spent fighting for the freedom for blacks. And you know, we have to remind a guy that says something stupid like this that the Negro didn't enslave himself. And, you know, I never heard one person tell the Jews to get over it. And they keep throwing that up in our face over and over again. The Holocaust, the Holocaust, the Holocaust. Do your own study on that and find out what that's all about. But nobody's ever told the Jews to get over their supposed mistreatment. And just last year, our half-black president gave them another $12 million so they wouldn't have to live their years in suffering and indignity. You know, nobody's ever told the Japanese or the Ottawas or the Chippewas, and if I mess up some of the names, you know, bear with me, or the Seminoles or the Sioux Indian, the Klamaths or the Alaskan natives to get over their maltreatment or their transgressions. Now, each one of these groups has actually received financial reward for the loss of life, the loss of homes, the loss of their businesses, and the mental degradation of their people. But when it comes to the Negro, we told him to quit complaining. We told him to quit crying. One thing we can say about the Negro is when he's left alone, he finds a way to thrive and survive. I don't care where you look, you can't find any record anywhere in history around the world that shows any other group of people who accomplished so much in such a short amount of time coming out of a bondage situation. And you know, we can look back to the Israelites being freed over in Egypt, and they came out wealthy because they took everything that had been taken from them through the building of the Egyptian culture. And you know, study that for yourself and see who actually built Egypt. It wasn't Egyptians. You know, some of them did participate, but Egypt was largely built on the backs of the black Israelite. So study that for yourself. But you can't find any record, especially in this country, of a people that accomplished so much in so little over time. You know, there was so much accomplishment by blacks during this period after slavery had ended that the history books won't even mention their success. And you know, something happened not long after all this success, and we're going to get into that a little bit. You know, we look at, there were plenty of race riots in this country from the time slavery had officially ended. And, you know, the Emancipation Proclamation shows that 1865, but it was actually signed in 1863. It took almost 2 years for word to get out, well, a little bit over 2 years, matter of fact, for word to get all the way down here to Texas, where I am. But it was actually signed in 1863. And so there were plenty of riots going on after this had happened. You know, you had the Detroit race riot of 1863, which was whites against blacks. You had a New York riot of 1863, which was Irish against blacks. And there were several more riots during this period from the signing of the Emancipation Proclamation until the turn of the 20th century. But it didn't stop there. And so many of us have heard of Tulsa's Greenwood District, better known as Black Wall Street. We've heard of Rosewood, Florida. They even made a movie about that. But how many of us know that there were several other prominent black neighborhoods, communities, and towns that were also destroyed by whites or taken through eminent domain, which is by whites, or what we call urban renewal today, which was done by whites. In the state of New York, there was an area called Seneca Village. And it was actually predominantly black for a number of years in the 19th century. And through eminent domain, this land was actually taken from the blacks to build what we call Central Park, because, you know, the park is better than people's living accommodations, of course. And New York also had a town called Weeksville, which was named after a former slave named James Weeks. And this town actually disappeared over the years because of urban expansion. You know, because businesses and parking garages and structures and all that is more important than people's living. You know, don't worry about, you know, they always try to talk about just compensation for the price of your home, but you can never go buy a new home for what they paid you for your property. And so, also in Virginia, you had a place called Freedmen's Village. And this was also lost through urban expansion. And so, you know, there are a lot more instances of this happening. And then you had race riots. Like I said, the race riots didn't start at the turn of the 20th century. Because in 1906, you had Atlanta race riots. And this black community was destroyed. You had two gubernatorial candidates that were running for the office. And they were scared that the black vote would actually sway the election in the opposing candidate's favor. So both of them spread word that if blacks were to gain any influence, whites would lose their position in society. And black people, you should know, the two gubernatorial candidates that were spreading this word were your beloved Democrats. But this ain't the video for that. I just had to throw that in there. In East St. Louis in 1917, riots broke out because blacks were competing for the better paying jobs. And this actually happened during World War I. And because of racial discrimination, because of Jim Crow and things like that, the black men weren't allowed to join the war effort. And the companies, because the companies had been stripped of their labor force, black men started getting those jobs that the white men left behind when they went to fight in the war. And so whites actually drove through the part of town where blacks lived, and they destroyed it. And in this particular riot, 6,000 blacks were left homeless. And we wonder why we never see the black get ahead, because every time blacks get ahead at the hand of some white, somebody comes and destroys something. Now, this is not all whites. I said some whites, okay? I want to make that clear because I love everybody. You know, I don't care who you are. And if I can consider you a brother, your skin doesn't matter to me, but this needs to be told because we keep hearing blacks need to quit whining and complaining. Well, if everybody left us alone, we might not have a lot of these problems. And so in Chicago in 1919, another riot was started after an incident between blacks and whites at this swimming spot. You know, they didn't want this black kid swimming in the white spot. And that riot actually lasted for 5 days. And at the end of it, almost 1,000 blacks were left homeless. And in 1919, in Washington, D.C., of all places, the most prosperous black neighborhood in the country was hit by a riot. Whites were mad that blacks were living better than them, not only in their chosen fields of education, but they were also gaining access to what we call good government jobs. And the whites weren't getting them. And this created, you know, an uproar, and as has been in the past, and we still see it right today, a white woman said she had been raped by a black man. And we've seen that all through history. And the black man was actually released and found not guilty. But by the time it happened, it was too late. And this particular incident, white casualties outnumbered blacks. In 1919 was such a busy year of race rioting that it was actually called Red Summer. And Red Summer, you know, because of the blood. And we also had riots that took place in Knoxville, Tennessee. And this part of the country was actually, race relations was supposed to be excellent. They were supposed to be good. And a white woman was murdered, and a black business owner was accused of the crime. And he would be convicted later, but the verdict was overturned, which meant pretty much especially back then, they didn't have enough evidence to prove that this black man did it. And so, even though the verdict was overturned, they put him in prison again and killed him by electric chair. And the entire process, this black guy maintained his innocence, and they killed him anyway. But this time, however, blacks had guns. And we need to study our history on that, why they don't want blacks to have guns either. But because of the blacks having guns, en route to the black community, whites broke into gun stores. And because they broke into gun stores, they would eventually outgun the blacks, and the blacks would have to actually flee for their lives. And depending on what stats you look at, Red Summer, you would see anywhere from 26 to 36 separate race riot incidents. And in 1920, down in Ocoee, Florida, I believe, I don't know if I'm saying that right or not, but that was also a race riot there. And whites went through and destroyed every black church, every black business, every black lodge, and everything else owned by blacks at the time. And some blacks did not personally suffer at the hands of the riots, so what they did, whites went to those that didn't suffer and ran them out of town. And so the neighborhood, the community would eventually become all white. And then we also had, as I mentioned, Greenwood, Black Wall Street, and Rosewood. But I did mention that in Greenwood, Black Wall Street, 1,256 homes were destroyed, and over 200 businesses were destroyed. And so whites keep destroying everything we build, but then want to turn around and ask why we complain. And then we had a Harlem race riot in 1935, which black homes and businesses were destroyed. We had another race riot in Detroit in 1943, where blacks were left holding the empty sack again with holes in the bottom of it. And there are many more race riots I could point to, but I just want you to get a picture. No reparations, and every time we build, somebody destroys, and it ain't us destroying it. And the problem is, whenever a group of blacks become large and successful, white society never lets us down, and they work very hard to destroy those communities. But the sad thing is, there were other reparations given that many don't even know about. And on April 7, 1862, our great emancipator Abraham Lincoln signed a bill to end slavery in Washington, D.C. But guess what Lincoln did, the great emancipator? Because of this, Lincoln actually compensated slave owners for their loss. And for each slave that they lost because of that bill, in today's dollars, it was worth $7,000 per person. Haiti had to pay France on more than one occasion for their loss of weapons and slaves. Ain't that something? They had to pay France because they actually took their freedom. And Britain paid over 3,000 former slave families for their loss of property, after slavery had officially ended. And even down in Puerto Rico, slave owners were compensated for their loss. But guess what happened in Puerto Rico? Even after they were compensated, they still made all former slaves, that's man, woman, and child, work for another 3 years after they were compensated. Now, the place we call Wall Street in New York was built on the backs of slave labor. And look at the finances that run through that place on a daily basis. There are only a few blacks who are allowed to participate on Wall Street, since it's a good old boy system. Banks that were predecessors of Chase actually received 13,000 or more slaves for collateral on their loans. New York Life had shown that of their first 1,000 policies that they wrote, 339 of those policies were written on the lives of slaves. And these companies were not directly involved, but they bought companies that had some ties to the slave trade. I mean, the Brooks Brothers, and that's still a widely recognized name in some parts of the country, but they got their start selling slave clothing to slave traders. Now, some of you have heard me mention Reginald Lewis, and some of you have studied who Reginald Lewis is on your own. But he will be the first man in America to complete a buyout to the tune of $1 billion. Well, you know, did I say first man or first black man? I said he's the first black man, but he was also the first man ever. He was the first to ever do it, regardless of race. And guess what? White America did everything in their power to make sure no other black person ever did that again, because they blocked every one of Reginald Lewis' efforts after that. Look at what they did to Bill Cosby. I'm not talking about Bill Cosby's innocent or guilt. I'm talking about Bill Cosby kept trying to buy NBC on more than one occasion, and every time he's done it, white America has come out and tried to destroy him. You know, it's amazing that we ostracize Bill Cosby, but we give Bill Clinton a pass. I just don't understand that. Well, I do understand it, and based on what I'm talking about, you understand it too. And so they've blocked everything from a black person trying to complete a major deal. I remember some years ago, a bowling alley I used to bowl at, predominantly black bowling alley, and a former NFL player was trying to buy the facility, and every time he would go in, they would increase the price of the property, and every time he kept coming back, and he came back with his own group, and they kept increasing the property. Now, that's an issue, because my thoughts are if they keep increasing the property, go buy you some land and build your own. But he couldn't compete with the white major retailer that wanted to buy that property. But he kept coming back, so they kept trying to increase the price to run him away. And we look at affirmative action. I'm not a believer in affirmative action. Just want to make that clear. But who really benefited from that system? This program said that blacks would receive a 10% set aside. And the wording would later change and say all minorities would have to compete for that 10%, that small piece of the pie. And some of these white men are so crooked that many of them put their businesses in their wives' name so she could compete for the 10% that he lost. Because she's a female, she qualifies as a minority. That was done right here in Houston, Texas. I remembered when it happened. A distribution company, I'm not going to mention their name, but a distribution company right here in Houston got caught in that. And so we have a 90% set aside for white men, and they have the nerve to say we should be thankful for that small piece of the pie as blacks. And like I said, now it goes across everybody. Females, black females, white females, Koreans, Japanese, Chinese, Asian, Indian, Hispanics, whatever. Whoever comes over that's not white has to compete for that 10%. And so a fair and equitable system would open the gates for all companies, regardless of skin color, to compete for 100%. Removing that good old boy system out of the way. But the white man wants to maintain his position of superiority. And he wants to keep the black man in a position of weakness and as a second or third class citizen. Now, I don't care if you like what I'm saying. I'm telling you the truth. I've done a lot of research on this stuff. Because of this good old boy system, whites have been enjoying in affirmative action for a long time. If we were going to make affirmative action truly equal, why didn't the government open the door all the way to blacks? The white man is so crooked and vile in his thoughts and behaviors, and I'm not speaking of all. I want to make that clear. I'm not speaking of all. But he blames many of his discretions on black men. I mean, when we think back to the assassination of JFK, they blamed it on black Muslims. You think back to Oklahoma City, it was blamed on black men from the Nation of Islam. And I'm not Muslim. I'm not a member of the Nation of Islam. But I'm just saying, I look at this stuff. And even after the 13th Amendment was fashioned, our great white government created a system called convict leasing, where they would actually rent out black men to former slave owners for a fee. As a matter of fact, a white judge just got caught in this a few years ago. he was sentencing black boys to long prison terms and being paid handsomely for it. Now, during this system of convict leasing, police would now imprison black men for walking down the street looking for work, looking at a white woman for too long, and even something as simple as whistling. Just whistling, not at a woman, just whistling. One black guy was put on trial for being an eye rapist. An eye rapist, come on, you got to be kidding me. And what is an eye rapist? He looked at a white woman for too long, so he intended to rape her, according to white men. Never mind that he wasn't even within 50 feet of this woman. You know, so we don't understand what goes on and what goes into this system of superiority. You know, crimes that were once misdemeanors were turned into felonies for black men. They would actually be in prison to work off their debts to the white system that was created to force them back into slave labor for their white friends. Many of these black men actually died in prison, never working off their debt because the white prison wardens kept increasing the cost of the debt repayment. That was trumped up in the first place. I recently read something about Pat Buchanan on why blacks should thank white America. Now, some of you are going to probably get really pissed off where I'm supposed to go now, but it's got to be said. The article said, what I read said that blacks should thank whites for giving them food stamps, welfare, Section 8 housing, affirmative action, and Medicaid. I mean, are you kidding me? You know, among many other benefits. Now, I took issue with this for various reasons. Sure, there were many whites that worked hard to help with the abolishment of slavery. Sure, there were many who believed that the whole institution of slavery was wrong on several incidents and different levels. Sure, there were many whites who assisted with the Underground Railroad, you know, Quakers and abolitionists. You know, I'm not taking that away. Sure, there were many whites that contributed to helping build black communities and, you know, help build black universities and things. Yeah, sure. Yeah, we should be thankful for those people that did those type things. But in spite of that, as a whole, thanks is probably the last thing black America should be giving white America. Now, when the New Deal was put in place by that great dictator FDR, it was actually put in place to benefit poor whites. And, you know, if you study the New Deal and everything, that the Great Depression and all that led up, you know, you'll understand it ain't what you've been taught in school that it was. But it was put in place to benefit poor whites, not blacks. Some blacks were actually just fortunate enough to piggyback off some of those benefits. And even then, blacks were paid at a substantially lower rate than their white counterparts. Now, by talking about government programs, it seems that whites don't believe that blacks can do better than a white hand up. It comes across that white society thinks we should be happy that we got those good government food stamps and that good welfare. But the ironic thing is 42% of whites are on these programs compared to 42% of blacks. So who are the true leeches on society? Blacks would have never needed Section 8 housing had the white-owned and controlled government federal mortgage program treated them fairly in the first place. From 1934 to 1968, blacks were only approved for a mortgage in 2% of all cases. Does this sound like white America was being fair and looking out for blacks? The black church and the black community has long been able to sustain itself without help from outsiders. You know, I could give you a true history lesson on black success that's never been taught. Black businessmen and women that we've never heard of. I could give you a true lesson, and this ain't the place where you're going to have to get the book to see a lot of that. And I will let you know when the book is coming out, because it's just too lengthy to sit here and talk about in a video. And I just don't have the brain or the time and all that to break down and do a 20-part video series. I'd rather write it. But the reason we don't know about this black success is because white America wanted that hidden too. They hid many of our accomplishments so we can continue to feel inferior as a people and believe our entire existence as a people didn't start until that great emancipator Lincoln came to our rescue. Black men were in government with our founding fathers, but you ain't gonna learn that from the History Channel. We should thank white America, you say? Should we thank them for placing the drugs in black communities and then sending our boys and young black men to prison for the problem they created in the first place? Should we thank them for every other group receiving reparations, but they never compensated blacks, and blacks were the group who received the worst treatment in American society than everybody? Should we thank them for the aforementioned black communities that were destroyed by whites, destroying businesses, destroying homes, and destroying churches, among other things, schools as well? Should we thank them for leaving many black families homeless and on the run after every race riot incident took place? Should we thank them for lynching over 3,000 blacks that we know of for whatever reason they did it? And as a matter of fact, earlier this year, they found over in Atlanta, Georgia, somewhere, a black man had been hung again. So I thought we were supposed to be past that. Should we thank them for using blacks as carnival games where they would throw baseballs at their heads, having them standing behind a canvas to try to hit the head? And if you don't know what I'm talking about, I have another video called Human Zoos on this channel. Go look that up and listen to that one and you'll see what I'm talking about. Should we thank them for putting us on display as animals like we go to the zoo nowadays and feed us bananas? I mean, and that's also in a video as well on human zoos and Dunkin' Boots and all that. And as a matter of record, just as recently as 2011, some parts of India started this human zoo up again. Should we thank P.T. Barnum, Barnum and Bailey Circus, for starting his circus off the back of a former slave woman named Joyce Heath that he sold everybody on her being George Washington, former President George Washington, 180-year-old nurse? And his business still prospers today off of what he did back then? And many of you go out and give these high fees and amounts into the circus yearly? Should we thank white America for building better schools for white kids and communities and not providing the same accommodations for blacks? Should we be thankful that predominantly white universities stopped blacks from being accepted in the first place? Should we thank white America for raping our black women during slavery and then selling their own offspring into slavery? Now, society a lot of times will call black men deadbeat dads. Who is the real deadbeat after what I just said? Should we thank white America for stealing black music from many of our black artists and then calling it their own? Should we thank them for all the invention that black slaves created and then they turned around, got the patent, and received all the financial benefits for that slave's idea? Should we thank white America for creating an international whiskey brand that returned profits last year to its investors to the tune of over $17 million, whose recipe was created by a known slave? So tell me, why should we thank white America again? Frederick Douglass was asked, what shall be done with the Negro? His response was one of epic proportions. He said to leave the Negro alone, white America, because it was because of your doing that the Negro was put in the position he found himself in the first place. Excuse me. So as we look at all these incidents, despite your skin color, we should be ashamed and disgusted that the Negro American has never received compensation for his loss. We should be disgusted that we've been treated as second-class citizens. And like I said, it's not all, but there's a system in place. It should be noted that there were several blacks who were never enslaved in this country during all these periods. You see, they were successful in many industries long before slavery officially ended. I mean, we had blacks going to college, predominantly white colleges, in the late 1700s. And as I mentioned, that were blacks that were around with the founding fathers who signed a lot of that legislation, but you don't hear about it. So it's not a problem with a small contingency of blacks succeeding. The problem comes when a large conglomerate starts to gain economic independence, because whenever blacks get economics, the power base is largely threatened, that those blacks may unite and overtake the power structure and return to them exactly what they did to our ancestors. So the power base is not going to get a black race any assistance to come up, so to speak. And what they'll do a lot of times is they will hire black misleadership to report back to them on what's going on within the black race. That's why I don't participate in none of these pro-black organizations, because all of them were started by white people. And I just don't trust them, because everything they've done has actually set us back as a people. So look at how they worked to destroy blacks once they started to succeed from the abolishment of slavery through the middle of the 20th century to accomplish greatly. There were masses of black success all over this country. We had many multi-millionaires. And, I'm just going to mention a few here. You had Madam C.J. Walker. Many of you have heard of her. And her mentor, Sarah Turnbow Malone, in the early part of the 20th century, before 1920. And then you had guys like S.B. Fuller and another one named A.G. Gaston, who were multi-millionaires in the middle of the 20th century. There were many blacks who were multi-millionaires and millionaires in the 20th century alone, long before the white government came to help. All of these people were employing multitudes of people. And ironically, every time a race riot took place, it was always in a black neighborhood or community that had success. Those communities were the ones always targeted. I mean, I didn't even mention Negro Wall Street in Durham, North Carolina. It's practically been destroyed through urban renewal or eminent domain. Check it out for yourself. And in many cases, those riots were started because a white woman was the instigator of the riot. Not in a physical sense, but in a sense that her purity or morality was threatened by a black man. And there have been many black boys and men executed and lynched by this system of whiteness because a white woman, in many cases, sometimes to cover an affair with another white man, would accuse a black man of raping her. And although I touched on quite a few areas, there are many more that we could look at that destroyed black success, that destroyed black families, that destroyed black independence. So tell me, why should we think of white America again?